Psalm 121, verses 1 through 2. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. Have you ever asked yourself where you look when life trembles beneath your feet? Not when everything is going well, but when the soul is weary, when answers don't come, when the future seems like a steep and dangerous climb. Psalm 121 begins with a question that is not poetic, but existential. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? To understand the strength of these words, we must travel thousands of years back. This psalm belongs to the Songs of Ascents, hymns that Hebrew pilgrims sang while ascending to Jerusalem 3 times a year. It was not a sightseeing trip, it was a perilous journey. The paths were filled with robbers, wild animals, and rugged terrain. Every step upward demanded physical endurance and steadfast faith. The mountains surrounding Jerusalem were not only natural obstacles. Many of them held pagan altars, places where nations relied on false gods for protection and prosperity. So when the psalmist says, "I lift up my eyes to the mountains," he is not admiring the scenery. He is confronting a crucial question. Will I put my hope in what is visible? In what seems strong, elevated, powerful? Or in something or someone higher than all of that? We are people who often trust the visible, thinking it is the fastest help, but not the most constant and firm source. And then comes the answer that redefines biblical faith. My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. It does not come from the mountains. It does not come from human systems. It does not come from our own strength. It comes from the Creator, not the creation. If this channel blesses your life, subscribe. Click the button next to the channel name. It's free for you and helps us keep the channel active. Blessing many. Comment. Turn on the notification bell. Share this message, and join us until the end. This psalm was not written for comfortable moments, but for difficult journeys, for weary souls, for believers walking uphill. And today, centuries later, it still asks us the same question with eternal urgency. Where does your help truly come from? Stay until the end, because in this message we will not only explore the deep meaning of these words, but we will also discover why trusting correctly can completely change the way you walk, make decisions, and rest in God, even when the path remains uphill. 1. The mountains, symbols of misplaced trust. I lift up my eyes to the mountains. The psalmist begins with an image that may seem harmless to the modern reader, but for a Hebrew in the Old Testament, the mountains were charged with spiritual significance. In ancient times, mountains were considered places of power. There, military fortresses were built, but also pagan sanctuaries. Nations believed that the higher the place, the closer they were to the gods. That is why many idolatrous sacrifices were offered on the high places. As the psalmist ascends toward Jerusalem, he sees these mountains. He sees them physically, but he also discerns them spiritually. And then he poses a question that exposes the human heart. Where does my help come from? This is not a rhetorical question. It is an internal confrontation. Because in times of need, we are all tempted to put our trust in something visible, something that seems stable, elevated, or powerful. Today, the mountains are no longer hills with idols, but they still exist. They are systems, people, resources, titles, numbers, influences. They are modern, high places, where the human heart seeks refuge. The mountain of human power. Israel, on multiple occasions, trusted more in political alliances than in God. In Isaiah 31:1, the prophet warns, "Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help, and rely on horses, and do not look to the Holy One of Israel." Egypt represented a mountain, a strong empire with powerful armies. But God declares that such trust was misplaced because it shifted dependence from the Creator to the creation. The result was always the same: disappointment. The mountain of self-sufficiency. In Proverbs 3:5, we are exhorted. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. Self-sufficiency is one of the most dangerous mountains because it does not appear as idolatry. It appears as maturity. But when a person relies solely on their experience, intelligence, or ability, they have unknowingly changed the altar they worship. The psalmist looks at the mountains, but he does not bow to them. He recognizes them, evaluates them, and discards them as a source of help. And here is the first great lesson of Psalm 121. Not everything that is high is worthy of our trust. Before answering where help comes from, the text teaches us something fundamental. First, we must recognize where it does not come from. 2. The right question reveals the right heart. Where does my help come from? Before the psalmist gives an answer, he asks a question. And this is not by chance. In Scripture, questions reveal more than statements because they expose the direction of the heart. The psalmist does not ask if help will come, but from where it will come. This teaches us that biblical faith does not deny need. It acknowledges it. The problem is not needing help. The problem is seeking it in the wrong place. In the Hebrew context, asking this question aloud was a profound spiritual act. It meant pausing in the middle of the journey, looking around, and examining the available options for trust. And only those willing to question their own securities can receive a divine answer. Today, we live in a culture that responds quickly, but asks little. Yet God often works first in our questions before transforming our circumstances. The people in the desert. In Exodus 16, when Israel faced hunger, the people did not ask where their help would come from. They murmured. Their eyes returned to Egypt, the place of slavery. But Moses directs the correct focus by declaring, "The Lord will give you bread to eat." Exodus 16:8. The difference between murmuring and asking is key. Murmuring comes from a heart that demands. A sincere question comes from a heart seeking direction. God responded with manna, not only to feed the body, but to teach them who their true provider was. Jehoshaphat facing the enemy. In 2 Chronicles 20, King Jehoshaphat faced an army he could not defeat humanly. His prayer began with an honest confession. "We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you." Verse 12. That phrase is the spiritual echo of Psalm 121. Jehoshaphat did not deny his weakness. He brought it before God. And when the heart asks the right question, God responds with clarity. Victory did not come through military strategy, but through worship and trust. The enemy was defeated without Judah lifting a sword. The psalmist teaches us that mature faith is not about having all the answers, but about knowing to whom to direct the questions. Because when we ask sincerely, "Where does my help come from?" we are already walking in the right direction. 3. The definitive answer. My help comes from the Lord. My help comes from the Lord. After looking at the mountains, after asking the right question, the psalmist responds with absolute conviction. There is no doubt, no hesitation, no mixing of sources. Help does not come partly from God and partly from men. It comes exclusively from the Lord. Here appears the covenant name, YHWH. It is not a generic title for God. It is the personal name by which He revealed Himself to Israel. He is the God who listens, intervenes, and commits Himself to His people. The psalmist is not speaking of occasional help, but of constant, timely, and faithful aid. In the original Hebrew, the word for help implies immediate assistance, active support, and precise intervention. This redefines our spiritual understanding. God is not a distant spectator of our crises. He is the living source of present help. David facing Goliath. When David faces the giant in 1 Samuel 17, everyone else sees the mountain called Goliath. Strength, experience, armor, size. But David declares, "The Lord will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." Verse 37. David does not deny the threat, but he does not give it spiritual authority. His confidence is not in his sling or his skill, it is in the Lord. The result confirms the truth of Psalm 121. When help comes from God, victory does not depend on human proportions. Hezekiah facing the Assyrian siege. In 2 Kings 19, King Hezekiah faces the most powerful army of his time. Assyria not only threatens militarily, it blasphemes against God. Hezekiah does not negotiate, does not respond with pride, does not seek alliances. He does something deeply spiritual. He goes into the temple and lays the letter before the Lord. The divine response was clear. I will defend this city to save it. Verse 34. That night, God himself intervened. Help did not come through diplomacy or military force, but through absolute trust in the Lord. The psalmist teaches us an unshakable truth here. When we recognize the Lord as our source, we stop living anxious about resources and begin to rest in God's faithfulness. Because the help that comes from God never arrives late, never fails, and never depends on external circumstances. 4. The Creator as the guarantee of help. The Maker of heaven and earth. The psalmist does not stop at saying who helps him. Now he declares why he can trust fully in him. Help comes from the Lord, the one who made heaven and earth. This statement is not poetic, it is theological. The psalmist connects personal help with God's creative power. The message is clear. If God created everything, he also governs everything. In the Hebrew mindset, creation was not a past event with no present implications. It was the eternal proof that God sustains, orders, and controls reality. Therefore, trusting the Creator means resting in someone who never loses control. When we say that God is the Creator, we are saying that nothing surprises him, nothing limits him, nothing is beyond his reach. Abraham and the impossible promise. In Genesis 15, God promises Abraham a numerous offspring, even though humanly it was impossible. Romans 4:17 describes God as the one who gives life to the dead and calls things that are not as though they were. Abraham did not trust in biological probabilities. He trusted in the Creator God. The same word that formed the heavens was enough to fulfill an impossible promise. Here we see how Psalm 121 is lived out in practice. When help comes from the Creator, human limitations cease to be definitive. Jesus calming the storm. In Mark 4:39, Jesus rebukes the wind and the sea, and everything becomes calm. The disciples ask in amazement, "Who is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The answer is implicit. The one who commands creation is the same one who created it. This miracle confirms the truth of Psalm 121 from a Christological perspective. The God who helps is not less than the chaos we face. If he formed the heavens and the earth, he can also bring order to our storm. The psalmist leads us to an inevitable conclusion. We do not trust God because everything is fine. We trust God because he is sufficient. 5. Living in trust. A faith that walks, not just confesses. Psalm 121 was not written to be merely recited. It was composed to be walked. These songs accompanied real steps, long journeys, physical exhaustion, and constant risks. Therefore, the trust the psalmist declares is not theoretical. It is practical. To say, "My help comes from the Lord," implies a daily decision. To walk without seeing the entire path. To move forward even when the terrain is uncertain. And to rest knowing that God is present in every step. Biblical faith does not eliminate the difficult path, but it transforms the way we walk it. Ruth on an unknown path. Ruth left Moab without visible guarantees. She had no written promises or human securities. She only had a decision of faith when she declared, "Your God will be my God." Ruth 1:16. Ruth walked trusting, and in the process discovered that God's help manifests as we obey, not before. The result was redemption, provision, and a place in the Messiah's genealogy. This confirms the principle of Psalm 121. God's help accompanies those who decide to entrust Him with their path. Peter walking on water. In Matthew 14, Peter walks on the sea while keeping his eyes on Jesus. The miracle did not occur in the boat, but in the step of faith. When Peter began to look at the wind, he lost stability. When he refocused on the Lord, he was upheld. Here we see that trust does not consist in the absence of fear, but in the correct direction of the gaze. The psalmist teaches us that true faith does not remain immobile, does not wait for perfect conditions, does not depend on visible mountains. It trusts, walks, and rests in the Lord. And here we arrive at the heart of the message. The correct source of our trust is not a place, nor a person, nor a circumstance. It is God Himself. 6. The confession that sustains the soul over time. Although Psalm 121 begins with a question and a personal answer, it ends up becoming a confession that sustains the whole life. It is not just a phrase for a moment of crisis. It is a truth for the entire journey. When the psalmist declares, "My help comes from the Lord," he is not expressing a wish but affirming a spiritual identity. This confession becomes an anchor. On clear days, it affirms faith. On nights of doubt, it sustains it. During long seasons of waiting, it preserves it. Correct trust is not measured by emotions, but by permanence. Job and faith that endures silence. Job lost family, health, and stability. His mountains fell one by one. Yet in the midst of God's silence, he declared, "I know that my Redeemer lives." Job 19:25. That confession did not immediately change his circumstances, but it sustained his soul until restoration came. Job did not understand the process, but he trusted the source. This confirms that God's help does not always first manifest as an explanation, but as inner support. Paul in prison. In Philippians 4:13, written from prison, Paul declares, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." He was not free, not comfortable, not secure by human standards. But his trust was properly aligned. Paul had learned what Psalm 121 teaches. When the source is correct, faith does not run out, even though the path is long. This confession transforms the way we live. We no longer walk seeking constant signs. We walk sustained by an eternal truth. Because whoever learns to say with conviction, "My help comes from the Lord," is not left at the mercy of fear, weariness, or uncertainty. 7. Correct trust produces true rest. When the source of our help is clearly defined, something powerful happens inside the believer. The soul learns to rest, not because problems disappear, but because we no longer carry the weight of the journey alone. Psalm 121 is not a cry of anxiety. It is a song of security. The pilgrim continues walking, but now does so with inner certainty. They do not depend on their own strength. Trusting correctly does not eliminate human responsibility, but it removes anxiety about the outcome. When I know where my help comes from, I can obey without fear and wait without despair. Moses and rest, under the weight of leadership. In Exodus 33:14, God tells Moses, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Rest did not come when the people changed, nor when the problems ceased, but when Moses understood that God's presence was enough to sustain the mission. Moses was not called to carry the people by his own strength, but to walk trusting in divine help. This is exactly what Psalm 121 teaches. God's help not only delivers us from danger, it protects us from inner exhaustion. Jesus and the invitation to rest. In Matthew 11:28, Jesus declares, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." This invitation is the living expression of Psalm 121 in the New Testament. Jesus does not promise a path without burdens, but he does promise a heart that learns to rest in him. True rest does not come from controlling all variables, but from trusting the one who rules the heavens and the earth. The pilgrim of Psalm 121 continues moving forward, but no longer with a furrowed brow or a tense soul. They walk with the peace of one who knows that, no matter what happens, their help will not fail. And here the final great truth of this psalm is revealed. When we trust in the God of the heavens, life can be demanding, but the heart remains at rest. At the end of this psalm, we do not find a quick formula or a superficial promise. We find something much deeper, an invitation to live trusting. The psalmist began by looking to the mountains, but ended by affirming his faith in the God who is above all mountains. Today, you and I continue walking similar paths. There are uphill climbs that tire us, decisions that weigh heavily, questions that still have no answer. And in the midst of that journey, the Holy Spirit asks the heart the same question. Where does your help come from? Not from human power, not from economic stability, not from temporary securities. Our help comes from Jehovah, the God who made the heavens and the earth, the God who does not sleep, the God who does not abandon, the God who sustains, even when we do not understand. Trusting in Him does not mean everything will be easy. It means you will never walk alone. Maybe today you do not see the solution, but you can rest in the source. Maybe the path remains uphill, but the one who helps you does not grow weary. Keep trusting. Do not lower your gaze. Do not change your source. And if this message has spoken to your heart, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, to continue diving deeper together into the living Word of God. Activate the bell. Share this message with someone who needs to remember where their help comes from. And join us on this journey of faith. Because as long as we keep lifting our eyes to the true God, our trust will be well placed, and our soul will be secure.